devil dogs, leathernecks, jarheads. They've been called a lot of things over the past 240 years. This is 5 things you don't know about the U.S. Marine Corps.
Flight 611, we got him moving, we're going back to buttoned up.
The U.S. Marine Corps traces its origin back to November 10, 1775, when the Second Continental Congress approved a resolution to raise 2 battalions of Marines. To help carry out this order, the Marines' first commandant, Samuel Nicholas, appointed Robert Mullen chief Marine recruiter. Since Mullen was the manager of a popular bar in Philadelphia called the Tun Tavern, the 2 men decided to hold the first recruiting drive at the establishment. And because of this, the bar is now considered the birthplace of the U.S. Marine Corps.
Rev 2 directly in front of us, sir. Let's be advised, Rev's directly to our front right now.
On February 20th, 1962, John Glenn made history as the first American to orbit the Earth.
What a beautiful view.
But before he became famous as an astronaut, Glenn actually had a long and distinguished career in the U.S. Marine Corps. In December 1941, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, Glenn quit college and enlisted in the military. Training first as a naval aviation cadet, he eventually transferred to the U.S. Marine Corps and was sent to the South Pacific, where he flew 59 combat missions as an F-4U fighter pilot. After the war ended in 1945, Glenn stayed in the Corps and eventually went on to fly more combat missions during the Korean War. In fact, it wasn't until January 1st, 1965, almost 3 years after his famous space flight, that Glenn finally retired from the Marines with the rank of colonel. Hoorah is one of the most well-known motivational calls in the U.S. military today. So how did this distinctive call start? According to several Marine historians, the origins of hoorah go back to recon Marines stationed in Korea in the 1950s. At that time, Marines in the 1st Amphibious Reconnaissance Company often traveled via submarine. When they were preparing for a descent, the call "dive, dive" would go out over the intercom, followed by the sound of a klaxon alarm.
Clear the bridge. Dive, dive.
The Marines who heard that distinctive sound started to use it as a means to motivate one another. And they began yelling "Aruga" during runs and physical training. But because it was sort of a mouthful, Aruga was eventually shortened to the hoorah that we all know today.
They're going to fire a 3rd rocket, sir.
News of the Japanese attack reached the president at 2:25 p.m.
At the start of World War II, Paul H. Douglas was a middle-aged college professor living in Chicago. Although he initially opposed U.S. intervention in the war, he quickly came to believe that isolationist policies only benefited aggressive nations like Germany and Japan. And once he made up his mind, Douglas wanted the chance to fight. So, with the help of his old friend, Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox, he managed to enlist in the U.S. Marine Corps at the ripe old age of 50. He then went on to complete Marine boot camp at Parris Island, graduating in 1942 as the oldest man to ever do so. Douglas was sent to the Pacific, where he received 2 Purple Hearts. The first, after he was grazed by shrapnel while helping carry ammo to the front lines on Peleliu, and the second after he was severely wounded by machine gun fire while helping evacuate wounded on Okinawa. In 1946, after a 13-month stay in the hospital, the then 54-year-old Douglas was honorably discharged from the Marines.
up, and we'll tell you to hold it up.
In August 1942, 14-year-old Jack Lucas lied his way into service by telling a Marine Corps recruiter that he was 17. After completing training and a transfer to Hawaii, Lucas eventually found his way into the 5th Marine Division, and with them, he arrived at Iwo Jima. On the second day of the invasion, February 20th, 1945, which was just 6 days past his real 17th birthday, Lucas and 3 other Marines were creeping through a ravine when they came under heavy Japanese attack. In an attempt to save his fellow men, Lucas jumped on top of 2 hand grenades and used his body to absorb the blast. Although severely wounded on his right side, he survived the explosion and saved the others from near certain death. For this heroic action, Lucas was later awarded the Medal of Honor, becoming the youngest recipient in any conflict other than the Civil War. Today, the Marine Corps emblem with its eagle, globe, and anchor is one of the most iconic symbols in the world. But do you know what each of its parts represent? And do you know which Marine is responsible for its design? If so, post your answer below or reach out to us through Twitter using hashtag 5thingsyouDon'tKnow.